Eau Rouge is the fastest corner in Formula 1. Flat out, the car goes light over the crest at nearly 200 miles an hour. Now imagine the power dying. That is what happens to George Russell at Spa. His Mercedes battery drops to zero, and on the straight that follows, he is slower than a Formula 2 car. So how does a driver chasing a championship end up beached in the gravel on lap 1, screaming at his own team over the radio? The short version is that his own car did it to him. Out of the very first corner, the Mercedes lost its electrical power, and on a circuit built for raw top speed that left George Russell with no way to defend himself. He started the race third on the grid, and within a single straight, he had become a sitting duck. He was tipped into the gravel before the opening lap was even finished, and he unloaded on his own team over the radio in words the broadcast simply could not put to air. And by the end of the afternoon, the man who runs Mercedes would walk in front of the cameras and admit the entire thing was their fault. That is the headline. The details are so much worse. It begins at the start line. Russell launches cleanly and settles into the top 3, exactly where a fast car wants to be. Then, coming out of that first corner, the battery refuses to recharge, and he is already 35% down on charge. To a casual viewer, that sounds like a small technical detail. It is not. In a modern Formula 1 car, a number like that is catastrophic on a long straight. Half of the car's performance comes from its electrical energy, the deployment that fires the machine forward out of the corners. Lose it, and you are dragging a heavy hybrid around with one hand tied behind your back. And the mechanics of it are brutal. Under braking, one of these cars is supposed to harvest energy, clawing it back into the battery so it can be fired out again on the next straight. On Russell's car, that recovery just failed. The battery went into the first corner and, for reasons nobody in the garage could explain in the moment, refused to take the charge back. So there was nothing stored and nothing to deploy, right when the longest straights of the year were about to arrive. And of every circuit on the calendar, Spa is the cruelest possible place for it to happen. This track is built out of long, flat-out straights, separated by only a handful of corners. It rewards top speed above almost everything else. So a Mercedes with no deployment, on a weekend defined by straight-line speed, is a car that has lost the one thing this circuit demands most. Russell knows it the instant it happens. He can feel the car sliding backwards underneath him, while his own hands are doing everything right. He climbs toward Eau Rouge, the corner that defines this whole place. It is a steep, blind rush uphill, taken almost flat out, the kind of corner that separates the brave from everybody else. By the time Russell reaches the top, the readout on his steering wheel shows a single number, 0. The battery is dead, the boost is gone, and there is nothing left to give. He crests the hill and points the car down the Kemmel Straight, the fastest piece of track in the entire sport. And in that moment, he is a sitting duck. Behind him, the whole field arrives at full power. Russell later describes it in the flattest and most damning way a driver ever can. He is going slower than a Formula 2 car. Machines from a junior category, cars that are a full step down from Formula 1, would be quicker than his Mercedes right there. And, one by one, they come streaming past him. Not one car, not 2. 3 drivers sweep by on a single straight, and there is nothing he can do except watch his race fall apart in his mirrors. He calls it dangerous, and he is right. A car with no power, shedding speed on the quickest straight in Formula 1, with a pack of rivals closing at a completely different velocity, is a genuine hazard on a circuit like this. Drivers have had enormous accidents at Spa for far less than this. A machine suddenly crawling on a 200-mile-an-hour straight, with a wall of cars bearing down on it at full speed, is the exact recipe that ends in a serious accident. Russell is not exaggerating for effect. He is describing a real and immediate danger, and he is describing it while it is still unfolding around him. This is not a driver reaching for an excuse after a bad result. This is a driver telling his team, in real time, that their machine has just put him in harm's way at nearly 200 miles an hour. And that was not even the part that hurt the most. Shuffled backwards through the field, Russell does the only thing a racing driver knows how to do. He fights back, into the left-hand corner at Les Combes. At the end of that long straight, he goes for the move, trying to reclaim a place around the outside. The car alongside him is a Ferrari, and the driver inside that Ferrari is the one name that turns this from a quiet bad afternoon into something the entire sport stops to watch. Lewis Hamilton, the man who spent years in that exact same Mercedes garage. The teammate George Russell measured himself against day after day, the 7-time world champion who walked out of Mercedes and pulled on Ferrari red. Now the two of them are side by side into a corner at almost the worst possible moment, and it is about to go wrong. Hamilton arrives into Les Combes buried in the dirty air of the cars ahead. His front tires are scrambling for grip. The Ferrari washes wide, refusing to turn, and the left front of Hamilton's car catches the right side of Russell's Mercedes. The lightest of touches. At Spa, at that speed, the lightest touch is more than enough. Russell's car snaps sideways and spears off into the gravel trap. The Mercedes is beached, buried, finished. Lap 1. Out. A safety car is thrown to recover the stranded car, and George Russell climbs out of the cockpit with his weekend already over before most of the grid has even completed a single lap of the race. Race control reviews the contact and rules Hamilton at fault, handing him a 5-second penalty. But the stewards also note what everyone watching can plainly see. Hamilton had understeer. He was fighting a car that simply would not rotate through the corner, sliding on toward the Mercedes he was trying to avoid. His left front wheel clips Russell's right side, and that is all it takes. The verdict calls Hamilton wholly at fault, and then, almost in the same breath, admits how little he could actually have done about it. And here is the detail that tells you everything about the mood in the Mercedes camp. Russell himself refuses to bury his old teammate. He calls it a racing incident. He says maybe he could have gone a little wider. Maybe Hamilton could have braked a fraction earlier, and leaves it there. He refuses to point the finger at the man who spun him out of the race. He will not even give the easy answer that fans are expecting. Because the finger is already pointing somewhere else, it is pointing straight back at his own garage. What comes next is the part that still does not quite make sense. In the seconds right after the crash, the radio coming from car 63 is not the sound of a driver quietly accepting bad luck. It is pure fury, raw, unfiltered, and mostly unbroadcastable on live television. Russell keys the radio and unloads. He demands to know what happened to the state of charge down the straight. He tells his team he had no battery at the one moment in the race he actually needed it. And he uses language that the television feed simply cannot air, over and over. The words of a man who has just watched a machine he did not build hand his entire afternoon to somebody else. Unacceptable, he says. The whole weekend, unacceptable. It is the sound of months of frustration boiling over in a single lap. Think about what it takes to reach that point. George Russell spent years fighting his way into a seat like this one, into a team that is built to win championships. He is not a rookie who cracks under a bit of pressure. He is a proven race winner, sitting in one of the quickest cars on the entire grid. And here he is, on the radio at Spa, out of a race he should have been leading, because the machine underneath him failed at the worst possible moment for the 4th time this season. That is not annoyance at one bad afternoon. That is what trust sounds like when it finally breaks. Listen to that message closely, and notice what is missing from it. He does not scream about Hamilton. He does not rage at the driver who spun him into the gravel. Every ounce of the anger is aimed inward, at the pit wall, at the engineers, at the car itself. In the heat of the worst moment of his season so far, George Russell already knows exactly who took him out of this race. And it was not the Ferrari. The contrast is almost eerie when you see him later, out of the car. In front of the cameras, he is calm, measured, almost hollow. He says he is numb to the disappointment by now, as if this has happened so many times that the sting itself has started to fade. The furious voice on the radio and the flat, tired man standing in the interview pen are the same person, 20 minutes apart. That gap between the two versions of him tells you exactly how deep this problem runs. And that fury was only the first layer. Here is where the story stops being about one driver's rotten luck and turns into something far bigger. Because George Russell was not the only Mercedes that lost power at the start of the Belgian Grand Prix. Every single Mercedes engine on the grid hit the same wall. The works team, the customer cars, all of them suffered the same shortfall of energy out of that first corner. Russell got the worst of it by some distance. But his own teammate, the young driver leading the championship, felt it too. Just a fraction less. Enough that he came out the other side of it. Further back, an Alpine running a Mercedes engine had no power at the start and slid backwards through the field, its driver losing several places on the opening lap, through no fault of his own. When one manufacturer's power unit misfires across every car that carries it, that is not a coincidence. That is a fingerprint. So this is not a loose wire on a single car. This is not one unlucky component picking the worst possible day to fail. This is a fault that reaches into every car running Mercedes power, on the exact weekend where a lack of straight-line speed does the most damage of all. The problem did not single out George Russell. The problem was built into the engine he was handed on Sunday morning. The battery quit, one driver's afternoon ended in the gravel, and the whole customer base felt it. But here is the cruelest twist of the entire day. On the very same afternoon, with the very same power problem, the very same team won the race. Because while Russell sat beached at Les Combes, the other Mercedes was quietly disappearing up the road. Kimi Antonelli, the teenager sharing that same garage, had started from pole position. He survived the identical energy shortfall Russell did, held his nerve through the safety car and a well-timed pit stop, and then hunted down the Ferrari running ahead of him. With 10 laps to go, he made the pass that decided the race. He crossed the line to win by less than 2 seconds, his 6th victory of the season, and drove off into the summer break as the clear leader of the World Championship. Sit with that for a moment. The same team, the same weekend, the same fault buried in the same engine. One car takes the hit and wins the Belgian Grand Prix. The other car takes the hit and ends up in the gravel on lap 1, its driver swearing down the radio. It is proof that this Mercedes is more than capable of winning races. It simply chose the worst possible moment to fail the wrong driver. And somehow, that makes the whole thing worse. Behind Antonelli, the rest of the podium filled up without a single works Mercedes on it in the fight. Charles Leclerc brought his Ferrari home in second, Max Verstappen dragged his Red Bull up to third, and Lewis Hamilton, even after serving that 5-second penalty for the very contact that took Russell out, still climbed back through the field to finish fourth. Hamilton's own afternoon was far from clean. He also picked up a separate investigation for an unsafe release in the pit lane, which ended in a fine rather than more time lost. He had a scrappy, messy race by his own high standards, and he still finished it comfortably ahead of the man he had spun into the gravel on the opening lap. Because a slow car that loses is just a slow car. A fast car that keeps braking on its own drivers is a tragedy, and Mercedes has been writing this exact tragedy all season long. Rewind a few weeks to Canada. George Russell is running near the front, points sitting right there on the table, a strong result there for the taking. And his own car drops him out of the race. 25 points, gone. Not lost to a rival who was quicker on the day, lost to a machine that failed him when it mattered most. And if that had been the only time, Mercedes might have shrugged it off as a cruel one-off. But then came Barcelona. This time, it is the other Mercedes, the championship leader himself, who suffers a battery failure of his own and loses second place out on the road. 18 more points, gone, in almost exactly the same way as before. The team told itself it finally had a grip on its reliability. It did not. At Silverstone, another part on the car let go and cost them yet another result. 3 weekends, 3 deep wounds the team inflicted entirely on itself, and now a fourth here at Spa, the biggest one of the lot. The warning lights had been flashing all season long. A pattern this clear stops being bad luck somewhere around the second failure. It is a car that keeps sabotaging its own drivers, and a team that has not been able to make it stop. And somehow, it gets worse. Even the man in charge saw this one coming. In his own words, before the race weekend had even begun, Mercedes had left far too much on the table lately. Reliability had cost them points, and in a championship this tight, that was something they simply could not afford. He said all of that out loud, days before his lead driver was wiped out on lap 1 by the very thing he had just finished warning everybody about. But the version that went out on television was only half the story. Which brings us to the moment that makes this different from every other bad day at the office. When a team destroys its own driver's race, the usual move is to hide from it. Blame the incident, blame the other car, say we will look into it, and quietly change the subject. Toto Wolff does the exact opposite. He walks straight in front of the cameras after the race, and he says the words no team principal ever wants to say out loud. It 100% goes on us. There is no spin, no deflection, nothing held back. The man who runs Mercedes stands in public and drops the entire blame squarely onto his own operation. He explains that all of the Mercedes engines lacked power out on the straights, that it bit Russell harder than anyone, and that it is what knocked him out of a podium position and back into the pack where the contact happened. He even puts a number on it, admitting the cars were down by roughly 2.5 tenths of a second in their qualifying modes, a gap that is absolutely enormous at this level. He describes it as a completely new problem, something the team had genuinely never seen before, most likely traced back to a software issue, and he refuses to let his driver carry any of the weight for it. Russell has his full support, Wolff says. He is going to put his arm around the man and build him back up. And he makes clear the team is not simply going to move on from this one. They will dig into the software, work out why the recovery failed across every car that carries their engine, and make sure it does not happen a 5th time. It is exactly the right thing to say. It is also almost word for word what the team has promised after every single one of these failures this year. The apology is genuine. The only question left is whether the fix finally is too. It is the rarest thing you will ever see in this sport. An admission, on the record, cameras rolling, that the enemy was never on the other side of the garage wall. The enemy was inside it the entire time. And the cost of that honesty is written straight into the championship table. Before Spa, George Russell trailed his own teammate by 25 points. One race later, that gap has doubled to 50. The title that was already quietly slipping away from him is now, in all likelihood, gone, and his own team handed it over with its own hardware. There is a particular cruelty in losing a championship, not to a rival team, but to the driver in the other half of your own garage, sitting in a car built by the very same engineers who keep failing you. Antonelli is the future the team is building around. Russell is the one paying the price for the car's mistakes. Same garage, 2 completely different seasons. And it gets worse from there. Lewis Hamilton, the man who spun Russell out of the race, went on to finish 4th. That result lifts Hamilton above Russell in the drivers' standings. So the driver whose Ferrari put Russell in the gravel now sits ahead of him in the fight for 2nd place in the entire World Championship, by 5 points. And believe it or not, that is the cleaner half of the story. Mercedes still leads the Constructors' Championship, 358 points to Ferrari's 285. And that lead is the strangest part of all. It is proof that this really is the fastest car out there, quick enough to have built a healthy cushion at the top of the table. But the same car keeps handing points back through its own failures faster than almost anyone else on the grid. The pace says champions. The reliability says something closer to a team at war with itself. Ferrari scored more points at Spa than Mercedes managed, and the margin that once looked completely safe is now down to 73. Every wound the team inflicts on itself, every lap 1 exit, every 25 points left sitting in a gravel trap, chips a little more away at the one lead they still hold. So here is where it all stands tonight. A driver who had the pace to win a race, forced to watch a replay of his own car crawling slower than a Formula 2 machine on the fastest straight in the sport. A team boss who chose to stand up and tell the truth, instead of hiding behind an easy excuse. And a championship picture that has quietly turned into a story about a team fighting its own machinery just as hard as it fights its rivals. The image that stays with you is the one from the top of Eau Rouge. That single number glowing on the steering wheel. 0. A car with everything and nothing left to give at the worst possible moment on the worst possible track for it to happen. Mercedes says it understands the problem now. It says it will fix it. The trouble is, they said exactly that after Canada, and after Barcelona, and after Silverstone. The next race will tell us whether Spa was the failure that finally forced a real change, or simply the loudest one so far in a season full of them. Because right now, the quickest car in a straight fight keeps finding brand new ways to beat itself. And that is the one problem no amount of engine power can ever solve.